everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Laura. I just want to take a quick moment to thank everyone else on the call for being here and for the support this morning. Again, I'm Sam Stevenson, Senior Transportation Planner for the city. And this morning, I'll be presenting an update on our process for transit service reductions and the balancing of our transit fund. We've worked directly with Valley Metro throughout this process, and we will continue to coordinate with them as we progress further through the process of proposing and potentially implementing these October 2021 transit service changes. Real quick, here are the two strategic council priorities that really tie into our transit program. They're the priority for the 20-minute city and also the transit satisfaction survey. Here's our agenda and the specific items that I'm going to cover this morning. So some information on our fund balancing efforts and our local economy here in Tempe. The details surrounding our next proposed round of transit service changes that we propose to present to the public during this process, and if approved, these would become effective in October of this year, so later in the fall. And I also have some information about our proposed outreach efforts, as well as some of the information about Tempe's transit network in the context of the regional transit system. And I mentioned that we took all of these proposals through our council process last month, and we did get some concurrence on our process and strategy for presenting these proposals to the public. I do want to mention, and we'll get into this later in the presentation, but we plan to return to our council in May with all the feedback we hear throughout this process, and at that point, we hope to move forward with some direction on which proposals may move forward. So here's a snapshot of exactly what our multimodal transit program encompasses today in Tempe. These elements are funded primarily through our dedicated transit tax. They include bus, rail, and our bicycle pedestrian program, as well as many of our streetscape projects. Here's some information about our transit fund. So you may have heard in our last round of presentations that we're estimating the need to reduce our annual transit operating expenditures by around $9.5 million annually. This will help us to ensure that our fund is sustainable in the long term and that we can continue to provide a great level of service far out into the future. We look forward to receiving an updated forecast in the coming weeks that may or may not impact that $9.5 million target number. I also want to mention that over the years through the fund, we've made some significant investments in our local transit system. And later in this presentation, I want to share with you how our local investment has great significance in the region here. Again, the result is that our program is very successful. Our city demonstrates the highest transit utilization per capita in the region here. In addition to some of the points that we've shared before, I want to mention that our financial position is partly being triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic, and I want to remind everyone that our reduced ridership, reduced fare box recovery, and also some abuse that we've seen of our reduced fare policy, as well as our aging fare collection infrastructure, are also all trends that contribute to our financial situation today. We're working on many fronts in partnership with Valley Metro and other cities in the region to try and reverse some of these trends. The region has procured a new fare collection system, and that project is well underway, and we hope to see some improvement as a result of our new fare collection system as that kicks off over the next few months and years. We continue to move forward with service reductions. We want to make sure that everyone's aware that we're using data and facts to develop these recommendations as we advance these ideas through the public process. Our overarching goal here is to identify potential service reductions while minimizing the impacts to the community. Essentially, we're reducing our expenditures and maximizing the efficiency of our system. Long term, we want to explore any large-scale opportunities to reduce our costs of delivering transit service, recognizing that we have a very significant local investment here in transit. So now I'm going to move into some of the specific service change proposals and the process that we followed to develop those proposals. As I mentioned, we're going to be using the data that we have on hand to inform all of our concepts, And many of you may recall back several months ago, we conducted more of a community value style survey with regard to our transit system. And this slide summarizes the results of that survey. We completed it back in the fall, and we essentially asked the community to rank their priorities for transit service. The categories on the left-hand side are those that we'd like to leave alone for now based on the community's response. So for example, maintaining the orbit as a free system without a fare and the frequency across most of our routes, those were all deemed very important by our community as we heard through that survey. The categories towards the right-hand side were ranked lower by the community, and we're honing in on these aspects of our system to see where we may be able to reduce expenditures if possible. Additionally, we've been analyzing some of the more quantitative data for transit system performance, and this slide shows how some of our routes in Tempe compare to all the other routes in the region. So ours are highlighted in yellow on that middle graph. You can see that we definitely have some that are among the highest performing in terms of ridership, considering all routes in the region. We pair this with cost data, and we use a cost per boarding metric to compare the efficiency of all of our services. The goal here is to identify where service reductions will have a minimal impact on the community and ridership. And just as a reminder to everyone, we did go through a process around 6 months ago, and back in December, the council approved several changes that will become effective in April, so just in a couple months. The proposals I'm about to present to you all, if approved, after we advance them through this process, those would become effective in October, so in the fall, as a second round, potential second phase of reductions as we aim to reduce our expenditures. So jumping in here, our first proposal is to reduce the span of service on all local bus routes by 2 hours in the evening. We've explored this idea based on the outcome of the community value survey. And when we looked at the data and we reviewed our ridership data by hour, we found that the latest 2 hours of service on local bus routes are by far the lowest ridership hours throughout the day. The charts on the right show the percentage of boardings by hour, and the final 2 hours of service are highlighted in orange. So for example, you can see that on a weekday, the final 2 hours of service represent less than 2% total of our total daily ridership. I want to emphasize that this would be a very equitable change. It would impact all areas of the city in the exact same way. So this map shows that. It's also in alignment with the level of service provided by many of our neighboring cities in the East Valley. So currently Tempe runs service later in the evening than many of our neighboring cities. If you're familiar with our system, you may know that some of the trips on these arterial streets turn around at the Tempe border. We would essentially be reducing the level of service late in the evening to be more in alignment with our neighboring cities in the East Valley. The next proposal here is a reduction of weekday frequency for the Orbit Mercury route. This would bring the Mercury into alignment with the other 4 Orbit routes that serve downtown Tempe. I want to mention that we consider 15-minute frequency to still be a very high level of service and something that we'd strive to achieve on all of our other routes, hopefully someday. The frequency on the Orbit Mercury today is every 10 minutes. It was improved to that level of service years ago to address the ridership needs, but we're not seeing the same level of peak passenger loadings today that we saw prior to the pandemic. And in addition, our new Orbit buses have also helped us to greatly increase the passenger capacity on this route. So of course, we would continue to monitor this change as well as all of the other proposals we're making today as the ridership returns after the pandemic. The final proposal that we're bringing to you all for potential implementation in October is taking a detailed look at the service provided in the area surrounding Guadalupe Road. So when we look at our cost per boarding data, we see that Route 62, which serves Hardy Drive and all of Guadalupe Road in South Tempe, and the Orbit Saturn, which winds through the neighborhoods adjacent to Guadalupe Road, are both among our lowest efficiency or highest cost per boarding services that we currently provide. So we want to take a close look at all of the services in these areas to see if there are any changes we can make to continue to provide an adequate level of service in this area while addressing the high cost that the city is currently expending to do so. So the first option here is pretty straightforward. It's the elimination of the Orbit Saturn route. So you may recall the Orbit Saturn was implemented back in October of 2017. We've seen the ridership steadily increase since that time, but to nowhere near the level of utilization as the other 5 orbit routes. So that, of course, creates a situation in which the cost per boarding is very high. Even though this option eliminates the Saturn route, the area would continue to be served by all of the local bus routes that operate in the area today on all of the major arterial streets that are shown on the map here. And we have a second option to propose. We're calling this option B, and it's made up of several parts. I'm going to go into the first part here, and essentially, we would be removing the local bus service from Guadalupe Road, and we would modify or realign the Orbit Saturn route, as shown here, to serve Guadalupe Road in more of an east-west type pattern, while still serving most of the nearby neighborhoods and all of the activity centers in these areas that are served today. Again, the Route 62 would no longer serve Guadalupe Road. That would be picked up by the Saturn, and we would modify the we would modify the Route 62 to extend further south on Hardy Drive into South Tempe and terminate near Warner and Priest near IKEA today. This route is served by Route 65. And so in conjunction with the change to Orbit Saturn and Route 62, we would propose to eliminate Route 65. All of the Route 65 as shown on the screen today would continue to be served by other routes. North of Kyrene Road and Grove Parkway, that section would be served by Route 66 as it is today. And the section south of Grove Parkway would be served by the modified version of Route 62. And in doing that, we would enhance the frequency on Route 66 to ensure that we are providing an adequate level of service on Mill Avenue still. We would essentially run Route 66 at minimum every 30 minutes, and we would improve the peak weekday frequency of this route between downtown Tempe and Elliott Road to run every 15 minutes. So again, this is an improvement to frequency that works in conjunction with the proposed elimination of Route 65, the change to Route 62, and the proposed realignment, I should say, of Orbit Saturn. So all 4 of those proposals make up option B. And whereas we do expect that we have a little bit of flexibility to modify these slightly if we find through the public process that that some changes may make sense, I want to emphasize that all 4 parts of option B do work together because it gets us to this map here. So on the left-hand side, you can see how all 4 of those routes operate today. And on the right-hand side, you can see the proposed changes to all 4 of these routes. And as you can see, generally the same areas remain covered by the transit service. It's essentially a restructuring and an optimization, we feel, of service on Guadalupe Road. We do have specific questions about each part of this proposal, as well as all other proposals in our online survey, which is available here. So as Laura mentioned, all of the information for this round of changes and also the prior round are available online at tempe.gov/transit changes. Our public comment period will extend beginning today through March 21st. And on this webpage, you'll have access to a survey where we go through every single proposal that I just walked through, and we want to know exactly how each proposal may impact you specifically. So we want to take this data and analyze it and use it to help us inform our decisions as we make recommendations in May to the Council when some or all of these proposals may potentially be approved for implementation in October. Quickly here, I just want to provide some perspective really on how our local contribution to transit service through the dedicated sales tax that I mentioned aligns with other regional cities that fund transit in our region. This is a chart that was developed by MAG, the Maricopa Association of Governments. It shows that Tempe is the 2nd largest contributor to the regional transit system in terms of funding. The green bars indicate how much, the level of funding, really, local funding that each city contributes. And you can see that Tempe has a very significant local investment. As we look ahead here, I just wanted to mention we continue to progress through the process to balance our local transit fund, and we expect to reduce our expenditures by around $9.5 million annually to ensure the long-term sustainability of our fund. I do want to also mention that we were awarded some assistance through the CARES Act, so that was a federal funding package that came through to help fund service through the pandemic. And we recently found that we'll be receiving a second wave of funding. And both of those packages help us in the near term to cover the cost of expenditures as we continue to provide an essential service to our community during the pandemic. However, they don't extend into the future beyond these 2 years. And so that's why we're trying to reduce the recurring operating expenditures to ensure that we're sustainable into the future. So we're here today advancing the service change proposals that I described through the public process. We'll continue to do this. We have another meeting coming up over the next few days, and the comment period will remain open for approximately 30 days so that we can collect the survey data. As we continue to go forward, we'll keep an eye on our budget, and as we enact the service changes that were approved for April, we're going to return to the council with our findings from this process in May, and then we'll continue to return to them as needed if it's determined that we need to continue reducing our annual operating expenditures. I do want to mention that it's important for us to work with our regional agency, Valley Metro, to monitor the costs and growths of our transit service that they operate for us. We're also working with them on our operating contracts for the streetcar as well. And just so you're familiar, Valley Metro also conducts a lot of outreach, and they also have a public process for service changes. And I just want to make everyone aware that we consider the feedback that comes from all different sources. So we encourage you to take our survey today and respond through our platform so that we can get that data in a timely manner. But also, please feel free to complete Valley Metro surveys. They help us to compile the data, and we'll also use that to inform the decisions that are made here. And then here's just really a list of our next steps. So here we are today on our first public meeting. We plan to return to our Transportation Commission on April 13th to provide an update of our findings from this public outreach process. As I mentioned, Valley Metro completes their public outreach process, and that extends essentially through the month of May. So you'll see more materials and more outreach trying to gain some feedback regarding all of these proposals. And then on May the 6th, we will return to council with our findings. And at that time, we expect that some of these proposals may be approved for implementation in the fall. We also are presenting on some other issues at that time, one of them being the potential to implement advertising on our transit system as another potential revenue source. So that's something that we're exploring to see if that could potentially help to offset some of our annual expenditures. Again, if the changes are approved, they would become effective on October 25th of this year, so later in the fall. And with that, I think that concludes our presentation. So I'm more than happy to open it up for questions and see if there are any questions from the audience.
I am not seeing any just yet, Sam, but if any pop in, I will let you know. Remember, you can hover over your name and raise your hand, and I will unmute you if you want to ask it live, or if you feel more comfortable, you can put it in the chat. Well, Sam, I think you must have done a great job. Nobody has any questions for you. Anyone?
Well, I will say it is a lot of information, and you know, as I mentioned, we have another public meeting coming up on the 23rd, and our survey is live on our website, tempe.gov/transit changes. All of the information, including a recording of this meeting, beginning next week, will be posted there. So please take some time to go through the information. It's really important to us that we understand how each of these proposals may impact you personally. So please take the time to complete that survey. And yeah, I think we'll hang out here for at least a few more minutes to see if any questions pop up.
Okay, well, seeing that we don't have any questions, maybe we'll close here for today. But as Sam has mentioned before, remember to visit our website to fill out the survey, tempe.gov/forum. And it's also posted on tempe.gov/transit changes, along with the recording of this meeting, Sam's presentation, and all kinds of other information. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and thanks, Sam, for a great presentation.
Thanks all.